Imagine walking through a park in Krakow today. Seems ordinary, right? But what secrets might the ground beneath your feet actually hold?
That's the question we're tackling.
Yeah, this time on the deep dive, we're looking into a place that, well, beneath the surface of modern Krakow holds a really, really difficult history. KLPłaszów. It was a Nazi German forced labor camp and later a concentration camp.
And to try and understand this, we've got some really compelling sources. There's a detailed Wikipedia overview, an article from a local Krakow news site simply titled KLPłaszów.
Okay.
And also three quite personal video walkthroughs. They're from Arie's Krakow and Poland experience. They give you this invaluable visual sense of the site today and also the infamous Gray House.
Right, so we've got text and visuals. Our mission really is to unpack the origins, the tragic evolution, and the lasting memory of KLPłaszów. We'll use these sources to shed light on its past and, how it's remembered or maybe not remembered today.
So where do we start? The beginnings, I suppose.
Yes, how did it even come into being?
Well, the German authorities established it back in October 1942.
What?
And its location in the Podgórce and Wolodychka districts of Krakow, that wasn't accidental.
Right.
Initially, it was set up purely as a forced labor camp. The official name was quite a mouthful. Zwangsarbeitslager Płaszów des SS und Polizeiführers in District Krakow.
Zwangsarbeitslager, forced labor.
Exactly. That was the initial function. Exploitation through labor. The later change in name tells its own story.
And who were the first people forced into this place?
Primarily, it was Jewish people from the Krakow ghetto. This was right after the ghetto was liquidated, March 14th, 1943.
A truly dark moment.
And what's particularly disturbing, profoundly so, is where they built it. It was constructed directly on the grounds of two Jewish cemeteries.
Two cemeteries.
Yes, older ones, from 1887 and 1932, Abraham Street 3 and Jeruzalemska Street 25. This wasn't just about finding space. It feels like a deliberate act of desecration, erasing memory, erasing dignity, even in death.
Just building a camp on consecrated ground. It's chilling. One of the YouTube videos, the walkthroughs you mentioned, it gives this stark visual. Talks about a funeral home with 3 domes that stood there before the camp.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And it also points out the initial setup included animal pens and even its own side railway track, specifically to bring people in.
Yes, and the construction itself involved this massive desecration. Tombstones were ripped up and used to pave roads inside the camp.
That detail from Schindler's List, it's unforgettable. And the video shows remnants.
Sadly, yes. And it gets worse. They built sewers directly over graves. Remains were removed. It's just a horrific foundation for what was to come.
A truly devastating start. But as you hinted, this forced labor camp, it didn't stay that way, did it? It expanded, its purpose shifted.
It did. By July 1943, the Germans broadened its scope. They set up what they called a labor education camp.
Labor education, what did that mean in practice?
It was specifically for Polish residents of Krakow and also victims of so-called pacifications.
Ah, those brutal Nazi reprisals against villages.
Exactly. So this meant the prisoner population grew. It wasn't just the Jewish people from the ghetto anymore.
And the physical size of the camp grew too, didn't it? Dramatically.
Absolutely. Massively. It expanded to cover around 80 hectares. Huge area.
80 hectares.
And the prisoner population, it swelled to over 20,000 people. They were living and working in something like 200 different buildings and barracks across this vast site.
The sources paint a picture of, obviously, horrific conditions, but also intense forced productivity. It wasn't just suffering, it was exploitation on a huge scale.
Precisely. It became a key economic asset for the Nazis. The Madrich workshops were their prisoners forced to make uniforms for the German army.
Right.
And they also printed documents, orders, all sorts of administrative stuff for the Nazis right there in the camp.
So beyond textiles and printing? What else?
A whole range of workshops, automotive repairs, electrical work, carpentry, locksmithing, you name it. And Płaszów also had subcamps linked to factories outside the main site.
Including the most famous one.
Oskar Schindler's enamelware factory, Amalia, which of course became this place of refuge, relatively speaking, saving many lives.
The sheer number of people who passed through Płaszów, it's almost impossible to grasp.
The estimates hover around 40,000 prisoners in total, mostly from the Małopolska region of Poland initially.
Okay.
But later, as the war dragged on, large numbers were brought in from Hungary and Slovakia too.
Then came this other major sinister shift. It became a concentration camp. What did that change really mean?
Well, in January 1944, it was officially redesignated Konzentrationslager Płaszów by Kraków, KLPłaszów.
Okay.
This wasn't just a name change. It signified a move towards even greater brutality, more arbitrary detention, and frankly, a much higher chance of death. It also meant further expansion, with new subcamps set up in places like the Wielicka salt mine and Mielec.
And with that change came more prisoners, facing even worse horrors.
That's right. As the Germans liquidated other ghettos across Poland, transports of Jewish people were sent to Płaszów. And tragically, the camp became a site for mass executions.
Executions. Where did they happen within the camp?
Prisoners, including many brought from the Montlupic prison in Kraków, were murdered. The key sites were near the old Jewish cemetery, areas known as Hujowa Górka and Siduk.
Those names. Hujowa Górka and Siduk.
Yes, and today, that's where you find the large monument to the victims of fascism.
It's chilling to read that plans were actually drawn up for gas chambers and crematoria at Płaszów. How close did they get?
The plans existed, dated late 1943. It's terrifying why they weren't ultimately built. The sources don't give a definitive answer. Maybe the change in war situation, maybe logistical issues, but the intent was clearly there.
Even without gas chambers, the daily reality was terror. The videos mention that, don't they?
They do. One account recalls hearing unstoppable screams. These were coming from quarry workers nearby being brutally whipped, just constant audible terror.
And there's that quote from Helena Nelken shared in one of the videos. It's incredibly powerful.
Yes. I remember how I was sitting on the wall watching distant meadows and trains running to the horizon when I realized that all this was not for us.
It captures that utter loss of hope, the finality of their situation. Puts a human face on the statistics.
It really does. A devastatingly poignant memory.
So as the war started to turn against the Nazis, what happened to KL How did it end?
The liquidation process began in August 1944. This was as the Soviet Red Army was pushing westward.
So they started emptying the camp.
Yes. Prisoners were systematically sent away, mostly to extermination camps further west, places like Auschwitz-Birkenau and Stutthof, where the killing infrastructure was still fully operational.
The goal being to erase the evidence, get rid of witnesses.
Exactly. Silence those who had survived Płaszow's horrors. The very last group, about 600 prisoners, were forced on a death march.
A death march.
Yes, marched to Auschwitz-Birkenau on January 14th, 1945, just days before the Soviets actually reached Kraków.
So close to liberation. And after the Soviets arrived?
Well, after liberating Kraków, Red Army troops were actually stationed on the former campgrounds. They stayed until the end of 1945, and unfortunately, that period also led to more destruction and damage to what was left of the camp.
Amidst all this horror, specific individuals stand out. For good and, terrifyingly, for evil. Let's talk about some key figures.
Well, the most infamous perpetrator is undoubtedly Amon Göth, SS Hauptsturmführer, one of the commandants.
His reputation for cruelty is notorious.
Extreme sadism, random killings. He embodied the brutality of the camp.
And there's that strange detail the sources mention. He was actually arrested by the Germans themselves in September 44.
Yes, but it's crucial to note why. It was for corruption, stealing Jewish property, violations of SS rules, not for the mass murder and torture of prisoners.
That distinction is pretty telling, isn't it?
It is. He was released briefly due to illness, then captured by the Americans after the war, extradited to Poland, tried for genocide, and finally executed in Kraków in September 1946.
Then, on the completely opposite side, you have Oskar Schindler.
Indeed. His factory, Amalia, a subcamp. His actions protecting and saving around 1,100 Jewish workers from Płaszów and likely death. It's an extraordinary story of courage. The Schindler's List, people.
A beacon of light in immense darkness. The sources also mention Tadeusz Jakubowicz.
Yes, a survivor from Schindler's List. He later became the head of the Jewish community in Kraków. His life speaks volumes about resilience, about carrying that history forward.
Did any survivor account specifically mention that feeling, arriving at this place built on top of cemeteries, that initial shock?
The sources we looked at don't have detailed first-person accounts of that specific moment of arrival, but the very act itself, building a camp there, it screams dehumanization from the absolute start. It was part of the terror.
And it's important, as the videos and Wikipedia show, to remember others who suffered there. There are specific memorials.
Yes, that's right. There's one for 40 Polish policemen. They were serving under the Nazis, but were secretly part of the Home Army, the AK resistance, executed by the Germans right there in Płaszów. And another memorial specifically honors the Hungarian Jewish women who were brought to the camp and murdered there. It shows the breadth of the victim groups.
So the physical site itself, KLPłaszów, it's changed a lot since 1945. How has it been remembered or commemorated over the years?
Well, for a long time after the war, it was surprisingly neglected in terms of clear marking and public awareness.
Really? Just sort of left?
To some extent, yes. Some people apparently just saw it as a large, somewhat wild green space. The memory wasn't actively curated on the site itself for many years.
Hard to fathom given what happened there, but that started to change.
It did, thankfully. A significant step was in 2017. The Kraków Museum set up an outdoor exhibition, 19 information boards across the site, part of their memory trail.
Okay, so providing context on the ground.
Exactly, making the history visible again. And then, more recently, a bigger initiative.
The dedicated museum.
Yes, in 2020, the city of Kraków formally established the KLPłaszów Museum. It's a joint project with the Polish Ministry of Culture.
But that hasn't been entirely straightforward, has it? The sources mention controversies.
No, it hasn't. Like many sites with such painful histories, its development sparked debate.
What were the main issues? People objecting to the museum itself?
Not necessarily the museum in principle, but the specifics. Some local residents were concerned about losing what they saw as valuable green space. There were protests against plans for fencing the entire 80-hectare area, and particularly against cutting down trees.
Ah, the classic tension.
Yeah.
Preserving nature versus preserving memory. How significant was the opposition?
Well, one source mentioned a petition against the tree felling got quite a few signatures. So it highlights this real conflict. How do you create a respectful memorial site without impacting the current environment and the people who live nearby?
It's a difficult balance, finding a way to honor the past while navigating present-day concerns.
Absolutely. These debates are really common. But despite the controversies, the commemoration work has moved forward. In 2022, there was this really poignant action.
What was that?
People used natural dyes to temporarily mark the original boundaries of those two pre-war Jewish cemeteries, a visual reminder of what was erased.
That's powerful. A quiet act of remembrance.
And also in 2022, they held a competition for the design of the museum's permanent exhibition, so things are progressing.
And alongside the planned museum, there are those existing memorials we touched on.
Yes, the big monument to the victims of fascism from 1964 is very prominent. Then the memorial to Hungarian Jewish women from 2000, and the one from 2012 for the Blue policemen, the AK members executed there. Each tells a part of the story.
And the YouTube videos we use, they're almost like a modern form of remembrance too, aren't they?
Yeah.
Documenting the site as it is now.
In a way, yes. They offer a personal perspective, walking through the space. One video points out a single tombstone, likely placed there much later, which just highlights how many graves are completely unmarked. Another video focuses on Hebrew script on one memorial, hope and never again. Very powerful words.
Finally, let's talk about the Gray House. It's mentioned quite a bit, seems significant.
It is. The Syridom, the Gray House. It's located just outside the main camp area on Jerozolimska Street. It actually predates the camp built in 1925.
What was its original purpose?
It served the Jewish community, specifically people working in the cemetery administration. Then, during the war, the Nazis took it over. It became an office building for staff working in the Płaszów camp.
But it might have had a darker role too.
Reports strongly suggest the lower levels, the cellars, were used as a prison, part of the camp's detention system.
Right, the video walkthrough shows it from the outside, looking quite derelict now.
Yes, and it mentions the nearby grave of Sarah Schneer. She was the founder of the Beth Jacob School Network for Jewish Girls, another link to the vibrant community that was destroyed.
And there are ruins nearby too.
Ruins of two other pre-war Jewish communal buildings, used for preparing bodies for burial. More silent witnesses to what was lost.
So, putting it all together, KLPłaszow's story is this terrible arc. From sacred ground, Jewish cemeteries,
to a brutal forced labor camp, then an even more horrific concentration camp.
and now, today, a memorial site.
Yeah.
But one still figuring out exactly how best to remember, grappling with its past and present.
And the sheer scale. We have to remember the numbers. An estimated 6,000 people murdered there. Over 35,000 imprisoned.
It's staggering. And despite those controversies around the museum, the efforts to preserve this memory through the memorials, the planned exhibition, they feel incredibly important.
Absolutely essential. Which really brings us to a final thought for you, the listener.
Yeah. As you go about your life, maybe walking through places that seem ordinary, what's our responsibility? to understand, to acknowledge the layers of history beneath our feet, especially the difficult parts.
And how does confronting a past like Płaszów shape how we see things now, how we think about the future?
And what does it mean when a place of such unimaginable suffering becomes a space for remembrance, but also for some, still a point of tension and debate today?
It's a heavy question, something to reflect on, definitely.